Hello, and welcome to Flow Space 101 Reading Flow. Today, we are beginning Anne Frank, chapters 1 through 3. Before we read, we are going to prepare our minds for the story. We'll learn some important vocabulary, meet Anne and her family, understand a little of the history around her, and then read with a purpose. Here is our big question. How can a normal life change when freedom begins to disappear? As we read, keep that question in your mind. Anne's story begins with many things that may feel familiar to us: family, school, friends, and everyday worries. But little by little, the world around her begins to change. So today, we're not only going to ask, what happened? We're also going to ask, why did it happen? How did it affect Anne? And what changed in her everyday life? Let's begin. Before we meet Anne as an important person in history, let's meet her simply as a girl. Anne Frank was born in Germany in 1929. She had an older sister named Margot, and her parents were Otto and Edith. Anne's family was Jewish, and they later moved to Amsterdam. But here is something important to remember. Anne was not thinking of herself as a historical figure. She was a young girl with friends, opinions, interests, and lots to say. She loved talking, spending time with people, and writing. So think about this question. Before Anne became famous for her diary, what kind of girl was she? As we read chapter 1, pay attention to the small details that show Anne's personality. They will help us see Anne as a real person, not just a name from history. Before we read chapter 1, let's learn 4 expressions that will help us understand Anne's everyday world. The first is at full pelt. If someone is moving at full pelt, they are moving as quickly as possible. For example, she ran at full pelt. Next is socket. A socket is a hollow place in the body where a bone fits. For example, the upper arm bone fits into the shoulder socket. Our third expression is catch sight of. To catch sight of someone means to suddenly notice or see them. You might say, I caught sight of my friend across the street. And finally, social butterfly. A social butterfly is someone who is very outgoing and enjoys being around lots of people. That expression is especially useful when we think about Anne. Now, quick check. Which expression describes someone who loves talking and spending time with many friends? Socket, at full pelt, or social butterfly? Think about it before you answer. Here are 5 more words that will appear in Anne's everyday world. First, struggle. A struggle is something difficult to do or deal with. If getting out of bed is very difficult one morning, you might say, it was a struggle to get up. Next, plead. To plead means to ask for something seriously and emotionally. If someone says, please give me another chance, they are pleading. Next is prefer. To prefer something means that you like it more than another choice. For example, I prefer chocolate to vanilla. Next, flatter. To flatter someone means to praise them, sometimes because you want to please them. And finally, tidy. Tidy means clean and organized, not messy. Now listen. Please let me go. Which word best matches that action? Prefer, plead, or tidy? The best readers don't just memorize definitions. They think about how the word works in a real situation. Now let's meet the people closest to Anne. Anne's father was Otto Frank. Her mother was Edith Frank. Anne also had an older sister named Margot. Anne and Margot were sisters, but they had quite different personalities. Margot was often described as quieter, more serious, and studious. Anne was more talkative, outgoing, and energetic. And that gives us an interesting question. How can 2 sisters in the same family be very different? Think about families you know. People can grow up in the same home, with the same parents, and still have very different personalities. As you read chapter 1, pay attention to how Anne describes herself, Margot, and the people around her. Those descriptions give us clues about character. Remember, different personalities, same family. Now we are ready to read chapter 1. But before you begin, I want to give you a reading mission. You do not need to remember every single detail. Instead, find the big ideas. As you read, look for 4 things. First, Anne's personality. What do her actions and words tell you about her? Second, Anne and Margot. How are the 2 sisters alike or different? Third, Anne's school life. What do we learn about her experiences at school? And fourth, Anne's family. What do we learn about the people closest to her? Good readers ask questions while they read. Who is important? Where is the story happening? What happened? And what was Anne like? So here is your mission. Read chapter 1. Pause the video here. As you read, stop whenever you find an important clue about Anne. Then come back when you're ready. Welcome back. Now let's check what you understood from chapter 1. But remember our reading flow strategy. Find, think, answer. Don't just guess from memory. Go back to the book and find evidence. Question 1. What was Anne's personality mostly like? Outgoing, shy, or quiet? Question 2. Which activity was especially difficult for Anne? Hopscotch, rolling hoops, or handstands? Question 3 asks you to go a little deeper. What happened when Anne tried to do a handstand? Try answering in a complete sentence. When Anne tried a handstand. Now compare Anne and Margot. How were the two sisters different? You could begin. Margot was, while Anne was. And finally, prove what you know. What detail in chapter 1 shows that Anne was talkative or outgoing? Find one clue in the text. Strong readers don't only know the answer. They can show where the answer came from. As we move into chapters 2 and 3, you may notice something. The vocabulary begins to change. And the mood of the story begins to change too. Let's learn 6 new words. Flirt is a person who playfully tries to attract someone's attention. Retort means to reply quickly, often sharply. For example, she retorted, "That is not true." A throng is a large crowd of people. To lurk means to stay partly hidden while watching or waiting. A shard is a sharp, broken piece of something like glass or pottery. And our most important word on this slide is refugee. A refugee is a person who is forced to leave home because of danger, war, or persecution. Notice that some of these words feel different from the vocabulary in chapter 1. They feel more serious. That is a clue. The story itself is beginning to change. Quick check. Which word means a person forced to leave home because of danger? Throng, refugee, or shard? And now think about this. Why might the vocabulary of a story become more serious when the events become more serious? These next words help us understand even more about the changing world around Anne. Punctuate can mean to interrupt something again and again. A raid is a sudden attack. An occasion is a particular event or time. Forbidden means not allowed. That word is especially important. Confide means to tell something private to someone you trust. If you share a worry with a close friend, you are confiding in that person. Tense means nervous and unable to relax. Suffocate means to be unable to breathe because there is not enough air. And an annex is a section or building attached to a larger building. Now notice what is happening to the vocabulary. In chapter 1, we talked about friends, personality, family, and school. Now we are seeing words connected to rules, worry, secrecy, and change. Ask yourself, what is happening to the mood of the story? Quick check. Which word means not permitted or allowed? Tense, forbidden, or confide? As you read, watch for words that show Anne's world becoming more restricted and uncertain. To understand chapters 2 and 3, we need a little historical background. We do not need to memorize every date. We just need to understand the direction of change. Anne was born in Germany in 1929. In 1933, major political change took place in Germany, and the Frank family began to feel that life there was no longer safe. The family moved to Amsterdam, where Anne began a new life. Then, in 1939, World War II began in Europe. In 1940, Germany occupied the Netherlands. And during 1941 and 1942, more restrictions were placed on Jewish people. Their choices about school, work, activities, and public life became increasingly limited. Here is the big idea. Anne's world became smaller and smaller. At first, she had school, friends, family, and ordinary worries. Then outside events began changing everyday life. Think about this. How might a child feel when freedoms disappear little by little? Maybe confused, worried, angry, excluded, or afraid. As you continue reading, notice when events outside Anne's family begin affecting life inside the family. Let's focus on one very important word. Forbidden. Forbidden means not allowed. Anne's world did not become smaller because she suddenly stopped wanting to do normal things. Instead, more and more normal choices were taken away. Think about school. Imagine someone suddenly told you, you cannot go to your usual school anymore. Think about a park. What if you were told, you are not allowed to play here anymore? Or imagine shops and public places that you normally visit. What if some of them were suddenly closed to you? And what if rules began deciding where you could go, what you could do, or who you could spend time with? How might that feel? Confusing? Angry? Worried? Excluded? Powerless? Now think deeper. Why is losing freedom different from simply choosing not to do something? You might begin. Losing freedom means Anne still wanted friends, school, activities, and an ordinary life. But the rules around her were changing. As you read, notice every time Anne or her family loses a normal choice. Now we are ready to read chapters 2 and 3. This time, we are going to follow a chain. Cause, event, feeling, result. Cause. Why did something happen? Event. What happened? Feeling. How did Anne or her family react or feel? And result. What changed afterward? Good readers follow the chain. They don't only ask, what happened? They also ask, why did it happen? How did people feel? And what changed because of it? As you read, look for answers to these questions. Why was Edith worried? Why couldn't Anne go back to her old school? What changed for Jewish families? And why did Anne's family begin thinking more about safety? Also notice feelings. Worried, confused, frustrated, afraid, uncertain. How do you know how a character feels? Look at actions, words, and reactions. Now pause the video and read chapters 2 and 3. Whenever you notice a new rule, a new worry, or an important change, stop and ask, what caused this? Come back when you are finished. Welcome back. Now it's time to check your reading. Our strategy is find, think, explain, prove. First, find the important information. Then think about what it means. Explain your answer clearly. And finally, prove it with evidence. Question 1. Why was 1937 a golden time for Anne? Begin. 1937 was a golden time for Anne because. Question 2. Why was Edith so worried? Don't only identify the worry. Think about what was happening around the family. Question 3 is an inference question. Why couldn't Anne sleep at night? Remember, an inference may not be written in one exact sentence. You may need to combine clues. Question 4. How were Anne's worries different from her mother's worries? Both were worried, but were they worried about exactly the same things? Question 5. Why couldn't Anne return to her old school? Think about the chain. New rule, school changes, Anne's life changes. And finally, find one detail from chapters 2 or 3 that shows Anne's world was becoming less free. Then explain why that detail matters. Don't guess. Look back in the book. Find the clue. Then answer. That is how strong readers prove their thinking. We have now finished our reading flow lesson for Anne Frank, chapters 1 through 3. At the beginning, Anne's world included things that feel very ordinary. Friends, school, family, games, and everyday worries. Then the world around her began to change. New political conditions, war, and restrictions started affecting her everyday choices. And with those changes came worry, uncertainty, and less freedom. So let's return to our big question. How did events outside Anne's control begin to change her everyday life? Try completing this sentence. Anne's life began to change because. And remember what we practiced today. Read, we learned about Anne's everyday life. Think, we noticed how her world began to change. Connect, we connected history to personal experience. And grow, we practiced supporting our ideas with evidence. You do not need to remember every detail. Remember the big ideas. Who? What changed? Why? How did it feel? And what evidence supports your thinking? Thank you. Thank you for learning with Flow Space 101 Reading Flow today. Keep reading, keep thinking, keep connecting. And if this lesson helped you, please like, subscribe, and share. I'll see you in the next Reading Flow lesson.